Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. As the discussions continue on the future of Adrian Newey in Formula 1, reports are today emerging that the rumours caught Newey and Red Bull off guard when they circulated a couple of days ago. This is leading Newey to emergency talks with Red Bull over his future at the team. Can Red Bull change his mind on the situation? Or if Newey is committed to leaving, will those conversations be more so about what his gardening leave might potentially be and any contract exit negotiations that he might need to have with a team such as Ferrari? Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, I greatly appreciate it. We have some upgrades coming to these upcoming races. Williams, they have upgrades in Miami and apparently many more for Imola. They had a, in some ways, disastrous winter period where their car was delayed. They had so many issues with production. Effectively, James Vowles was gutting the team from the bottom up to make sure they no longer design the car on Excel. And in the long term, that is going to be a useful period. Their car isn't great this year, but it's not absolutely tragic, to be fair, because last time we raced in China back in 2019, that Williams was a tractor. This year it was at least semi-respectable, and they have upgrades on the way, especially for Imola. But to be fair, in Imola, everyone's going to bring upgrades, so it doesn't guarantee you further upgrades and improvements, let's say, in the field. Haas as well, they have some things in the works. Haas believe their upgrades they've bought so far have actually worked, which is certainly a rarity in Formula 1 over the last few years, and that may well be connected to how Ferrari have progressed, of course, this year as well. The SF24 is far superior to last year's SF23 at this time in the season, and there is more to come. The question really is, how good will their upgrade package actually turn out to be? Because Carlos Sainz said, certainly after Australia, that he believes that after their upgrades come through, they will be able to compete with Red Bull in the latter half of the season. I think, to be honest, we've thought that for years now. And every single year, the Red Bull maintains a gap over the field, even as the other teams catch up towards the end of the season. And I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case again. But nonetheless, Ferrari are closer than they've ever been since 2022, of course, and as Vasseur says, sure, Max is a bit faster, but there's several cars within a tenth. One upgrade, you can go from, hero to zero, or of course the other way around, zero to hero. And the Ferrari upgrade package, which is a major one, is of course due for Imola. We know that this Ferrari is a relatively base model car when they launched it. There was lots of talk about the fact that from an aerodynamic perspective, it didn't seem like they'd taken as much risk as maybe was expected, but their car is clearly very solid, and they believe their upgrades are going to work. And I'm not going to lie, if what Haas have brought to their car has worked, then surely the Ferrari upgrade package is hopefully going to work as intended for them. The rumour is it's going to be a 2 to 3/10 upgrade package, which doesn't sound mega in comparison to the upgrades that we've heard about for the last couple of years, but in theory now these cars are reaching closer to their ceiling of development, so any upgrade that brings 2 or more tenths is a pretty damn major upgrade. So they've looked forward to this package since the beginning of the year, according to the Sky Italia correspondent here, who basically says they're very confident in the upgrades. I have felt this confidence since the beginning of the year. So the discussion around these upgrades is not in some ways dissimilar to what was talked about with the McLaren upgrades last year. You guys remember when the season started last year, 2023, for McLaren, the car was awful, but they said, you know what guys, just wait for the upgrades they're going to bring to Austria. They eventually did, and they literally went from being a backmarker, in some essence, certainly in Bahrain, to all of a sudden being a near-on front-running team, and then of course scoring podiums, winning a sprint in the hands of Oscar Piastri as the season went on, leading a sprint of course in Spa as well, not too far after that. So it was a major upgrade package for McLaren. I'm not expecting Ferrari to make that much of a step. That was very rare. They gained almost a second in lap time, McLaren, on average really, from the upgrade they brought. But this is kind of talked about in a similar way, that Ferrari have been hyped about this upgrade from day one. They're confident in their current car, but they've got to understand a bit more. I will say China was highly underwhelming for Ferrari. They were struggling with tyre warm-up. They were, 7-8 tenths off the pace of the Red Bull, which is, of course, unacceptable. And there's a few reasons why that they will need to figure out. A couple of things on the driver market then before we talk about Adrian Newey. Here is Carlos Sainz today in Jerez for, of course, the MotoGP fantastic race we had today. Spotted, of course, here with Marc Marquez on the right-hand side, Red Bull sponsored. So, there's been some questions about whether there's anything in that necessarily. And another pretty cool image, actually, of him today here on the Ducati. There is questions, though, on what's happening with Audi, because Sainz has some degree of pressure on. Red Bull are taking their time. Even if they are having conversation with Sainz, as we believe they are, it doesn't seem that Red Bull are ready to say, we've made our mind up, because Perez is performing better now than he has done in a while. Presumably, part of that is because he's under pressure from a contractual perspective. So if Red Bull re-sign Perez and lock in the deal, the feeling is that Perez will start to regress in his performances. And obviously, if they also sign Sainz, then Perez knows he's gone, and therefore, maybe Perez would continue performing well because he's got to get a seat elsewhere, but you know what I mean? Like he would know at that point the Red Bull seat was no longer on the table. So Red Bull are biding their time, and understandably so. But for Sainz, it makes things kind of awkward because Audi are knocking at the door saying, hey, can you just sign this deal or tell us what you're going to do? They're putting the pressure on Sainz to, deliver something. Mercedes seems reduced in likelihoods because they're trying to get Max, and if they don't, they're probably going to put Antonelli in the car. Sainz could be a stopgap for a year or two, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily what Sainz or Mercedes really want. And with Aston Martin not being an option because of Daddy Stroll, it now becomes an Audi versus Red Bull situation. Because even though Sainz has said they're talking to every team, he's not realistically going to go to Williams or, to Haas or something like that. It would be Audi because at least they theoretically could be competitive in 2026 and beyond. Sure, 2025 might not be great, but that might be a sacrifice worth making because they have a very lucrative offer, of course, lined up for Audi. They do have alternatives, however, if Sainz does go elsewhere or Red Bull decide, all right, you know what, we're losing Newey, potentially the team might be in a bit of flux. We need to lock down a potentially superior driver than Perez. Let's get the deal done. They may come to that conclusion, and if they do, and Sainz was to potentially get the Red Bull drive, Ocon is reportedly an interest driver for Audi. There was talk about Yuki Tsunoda, I think, as well. But Hulkenberg's locked down, obviously. Ocon is a potentially reasonable target. Obviously, he would have liked to go up the grid further to a team necessarily such as Mercedes, but Alpine have regressed massively. Both Ocon and Gasly are out of contract, I believe, at the end of this year, so they will both be looking for alternatives, and apparently Audi may well be one for Esteban Ocon. But still, the dominant story of the day in Formula 1 remains the Adrian Newey discussion, as and when he may well leave Red Bull, or whether that's actually going to be happening at this point. Every source under the sun reported the other day, this is a done deal, Newey has made his mind up, he'll be leaving Red Bull. The reasons behind this have been somewhat in question, whether it's due to the power struggle internally, which has almost certainly played a role, or whether it is exclusively because his personal relationship with Horner is untenable after the, what's Motorsport Italia today called the Sexygate scandal. Of course, Horner and the allegations with his PA, who was also Newey's PA. So there's debate on whether that was the completely unacceptable piece for Newey, or whether this was happening anyway over the course of the last few years with various developments behind the scenes in the team, the increasing power of guys like Enrico Balbo and Pierre Wache, and also the general feeling about the cost cap and what that might mean for Newey's position in the team. There's been a few indications that this was coming, and according to BBC, according to Autosport, according to Automotor and Sport, everyone with some reputation in this game was saying that Newey leaving Red Bull is a done deal. So, I'm still going to believe that until proven otherwise. The question is, did Newey expect this to come out? And what will his discussion with Red Bull entail? Because we believe he hasn't actually either told them it yet, or he hasn't really negotiated what the exit from the team is going to be looking like. Of course, the most successful designer over in Formula 1, if you guys are unfamiliar with Newey. But so his Red Bull salary is reportedly like 10 million a year. That's what the Daily Mail have reported anyway. And look, the money at this point probably isn't all that relevant to Newey, especially because, reportedly Aston Martin or even Ferrari are saying, look, we'll give you 25 million a year. Just come work for us for 4 years or whatever the case might be through the 2026 cycle of regulations. And also there was discussion from, an ex-Ferrari engineer on if Newey leaves, how does that destabilize the rest of the team? Are there other individuals, of course, such as Verstappen, but also other engineers, especially because Mercedes are trying to tell Max, hey, please come and join us. We'll bring Marco along. We'll give you everything you want, and we'll sign some Red Bull engineers because that's what you want. If there is a chance to do that, Newey's departure possibly signals to other Red Bull engineers that now is also the time to jump ship and go elsewhere before, the ship sinks, as it were. And especially if Mercedes or someone else was able to give better offers, more money, because that's effectively how Red Bull have built up the strong technical team they have. They hired many from Mercedes over the last several years, basically saying, look, we'll give you more money to come work for us. And that worked rather well. Now it's probably about time we start to see it happen the other way around. The discussion as well around Newey from Formula Uno, again, the Italian press, worth just keeping an eye on what they are saying because they have connections with Ferrari. They are saying that Newey to Ferrari is definitely on the table and they're willing to give him some, good money, of course, to make this happen. But the question is whether it actually is going to happen. The feeling is that, yeah, they're poised to present him with a substantial offer, but the length of the gardening leave will be pivotal. And this is when these reported discussions today with Red Bull really come into play. Because hiring Newey in 2027, look, it's still Adrian Newey, but it's not optimal, right? Really, you want Newey now, and if not now, you want him within 12 months, because then at least he can prepare for the 2026 regulations, which are massively important. So this is when the question on this gardening leave situation remains, and why discussions behind the scenes will be massively influential here. Riccardo Patrese also commented on this and says, without a doubt they, as in Ferrari, have everything possible to hire him. He is the king of the engineers. If Adrian comes, we will win. I know him very well. We are friends. During my years at Williams, we built an excellent relationship. But this is interesting. I know he is happy at home. He loves living in England. So this is the other point, that would he want to come to Maranello? Not necessarily, but there is also the possibility he could work remotely. He actually does that sometimes with Red Bull from his home out in South Africa. So I think Newey would not want to be, well, we'll see actually discussed by Motorsport in a second, a technical director where he needs to be at every single Grand Prix weekend. He wants to have kind of like a half-in, half-out role where he's working from what was described yesterday as a super consultant perspective, where he is potentially leading the charge on many of the design ideas, but he's not getting into quite the nuts and bolts as he used to potentially, and maybe that's not necessary either because there's other talented people in this sport. But as Patrese says, I don't know what will happen either, but people say that he's possibly coming to Ferrari. Furthermore, we've got to remember that where he appears, there he wins, which is what history tells us and why Ferrari would be rather keen to give him an offer. And even Brundle says that, yeah, teams with resource and funding will have been courting Newey for a while. If he becomes available, it's a double whammy because you gain his advantage and you take him away from Red Bull, of course, very crucially indeed. But a couple of days ago, the question was, what do Red Bull know of this? What has Newey told them? But, all the sources, the BBC, Autosport, AMUS and elsewhere, were saying, yeah, our sources are telling us top people apparently in the sport are aware that Newey is leaving. So if they were aware, presumably Newey had been telling people about this, and presumably Red Bull knew. Although Red Bull said on the day, we are unaware of any official communication from Newey notifying of his intention to leave Red Bull. So this opens the door to the necessity of further discussions internally at the team, and what exactly is that going to look like. There's also been questions on whether Newey will go to another team, whether he will call it a day. I did think there was quite an interesting statement here actually in this article from Motorsport on the 2026 regulations, because it's quite clear that Newey doesn't really like them, and this is actually one thing to think about, that 2026, the engine regulations are a bit strange. Newey's actually criticised them directly, talked about how he would like the cars to be rather different, and we also know that the 2026 chassis rules, or the aero rules, aren't even yet defined. That's coming by June, July, apparently. So maybe Newey is going to wait around until then, look at the regs and think, do I actually want to design a car for these regulations? Do I think they're going to be terrible and I don't want to bother? Maybe that's possible, but I mean, look, this guy loves designing cars, fast cars, and Formula 1 cars especially, so I'm not sure how much a role that's going to play. But he does have his nice yacht, of course, that he could go and chill out and relax on. I think Newey will always be engaged in something design-related. Whether that is still working for a Formula 1 team on designing F1 cars, that is another question. And as is going on to describe in the article, that he would prefer to have, not a technical director role, because then he would have to be present at all the Grand Prix. So he'd prefer to have some sort of a consultant position, which would mean that he could, get suitable conditions, which is really what this article is talking about. What would it take? What do you have to offer Newey? What would he like? Because I don't think he necessarily wants to relocate fully to Maranello. That doesn't seem like what he would think about, but I mean, who knows? Aston Martin want to give him some money to do so, but of course, potential partial remote work with Ferrari could be an option as well. But every team will be willing, of course, to try and make this happen. So this is then what The Guardian says about set to begin talks, Newey, with Red Bull's management to resolve the future with the team, which kind of implies these talks haven't happened yet. Red Bull weren't necessarily aware of this. And also the article says that the announcements about this from the media, let's say the reports and the rumours around his departure, caught Newey and the team by surprise, which was very interesting. Newey hasn't actually said anything about this yet himself, and, you know, until we hear it from Red Bull or from Newey, there's always going to be some doubt whether this is happening. But when the likes of Andrew Benson and other very reputable journalists in Formula 1 are putting their name to rumours that this is happening, you know, I'm certainly still going to believe this 99% likelihood, but there is always, you know, some degree of discrepancy and doubt, and maybe the story will change and Adrian Newey and Red Bull can come to some sort of agreement here, because this part on catching him by surprise reminds me a little bit of the Hamilton-Ferrari thing, when clearly Hamilton was talking about it, and there was even talk that Hamilton's like agent and like his manager and some other people from Ferrari, you know, they obviously, because it was a big deal, they couldn't shut up about it, could they? So they were telling people, and people behind the scenes started to know about this Hamilton thing, and then Hamilton kind of knew that it was coming out publicly as a result. He then went to speak to Toto, and then he obviously told Toto over lunch, like, hey, I'm going to leave Mercedes, join Ferrari. And Toto was like, all right, Dan, we've got to, you know, deal with this from a PR perspective. And Lewis was like, yeah, it's leaking in a couple of hours probably, because everyone kind of has started to realise this. And that's what happens probably the next day. But Hamilton, you know, maybe, and Toto Wolff certainly was caught off guard by the fact that those rumours were then out there. Lewis seemed to know that it was probably getting leaked. But in this case, if Newey has been telling people, or if it was kind of like a known thing behind the scenes that Newey was going to leave Red Bull, but he hadn't actually made that official himself to Red Bull, then maybe Newey was somewhat caught off guard by the, you know, by the revelation, or this is completely untrue and Newey has no intention to leave. But that seems very doubtful because, as I say, every reputable journalist has reported this. Even Mark Hughes said, journalist for the race, that it was a purely personal decision. So now this implies talks are going to be had between Newey and Red Bull. Either Red Bull are going to say, hey Adrian, you know, like, how about we do this? How about we do that? Can we work out a better solution here for you to stay around? But if, you know, Horner and Newey, that relationship was the reason why this ain't going to work, Horner ain't going anywhere, right? That is a known fact now. Like, unless anything dramatic changes over the next couple of weeks, it's set in stone that Horner will stay. The tyre owners have backed him. So if that's the reason why, then Newey will be departing. Horner, I believe, is confident that, you know, he has a strong enough technical team without Newey to maintain the level of dominance that they presently have, at least for the immediate term. So the more likely outcome is that Newey has made his mind up, I would say, and the conversations will be around what the exit looks like. He's contracted until the end of 2025, at which point a 1-year gardening leave period would take him into 2026, which is not optimal for Newey. Probably pretty good for Red Bull, but wouldn't be optimal for any team that wants to hire him. And this is when the conversation comes around to, you know, what other teams could do. I imagine that these meetings might involve Newey indicating his intention and then trying to discuss ways, because I think even the BBC mentioned this, that Newey apparently believes he can negotiate out of that gardening leave to some degree. And sure, usually these contracts, it depends what they stipulate, but they may stipulate some sort of financial penalty for, you know, not kind of respecting the gardening leave, or maybe some sort of buyout clause that Ferrari could theoretically match. Obviously, we don't know, we're purely speculating. But the theory might be that this idea that Newey is going to be locked down under lock and key until 2027 is probably up for negotiation. But that requires conversations from Newey with the team, and you'd think there was, you know, a great degree of mutual respect there between what Newey has described not long ago as his family. But, you know, when you've got a guy as talented as Newey in this situation, Red Bull aren't going to just let him walk away for free, as it were. So very much interested in your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.